I'm really happy to welcome to the show Thomas Reemer, co-founder and chairman of 88tc88.com. So hi Thomas, and thanks a lot for making it onto the show.
Hello Andrea, I'm very happy to be here.
So first of all, what is 88tc88?
88tc88 is a service for artists to help them access the Chinese music market. It's all online based, so the involvement and actual things that you have to do are very little. But as everybody might recall, the Chinese market is big, yet very difficult to access.
Yeah.
And we have been taking care of this and looked into the subject and found a great way of doing that.
And you have a very interesting background. So would you mind talking a little bit about what you've worked on before creating 88tc88 and how your background influenced the way you approach setting up this particular company?
I've started out in the music industry actually as a music manager and enjoyed it very much. I was also very lucky because my friends who I managed became very successful.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with me. It was all their good work. And so I went on to do the classical kind of, management, producing career, owned a music club, produced a musical with Yoko Ono, and organized classic music open airs until the very moment where I began to think about working internationally.
Yeah.
Because I had a big hunger for the world. And the foundation for that was laid in Liverpool. I studied at the Liverpool Institute for Performing Arts. It's the school that Paul McCartney has built, and I studied management there, so that was my first formal training. And I enjoyed it very much. 3 years, the network that opened up to me during that time, is, incredible. My first two mentors were Ed Bicknell from the Dire Straits and Paul Barrow from Duran Duran.
Yeah.
And so, amongst them, I got introduced to a lot of people. I set up my first company in Britain together with Mark Bjørnsgaard in London called Artists First.
Yeah.
And that was really what got me into the new music industry, right? That was one of the first e-commerce and shop solutions that artists could easily implement on their websites. And we had everything, mobile payment gateways, which we have built on our own. And of course we were too early and, open up the door for a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
But ourselves, we were lucky when we got bought out in 2006 by Sir Bob Geldof and his company Ubloom.
Yeah.
And Ubloom is now very active, and I'm on the board of Ubloom as well, and that's going very well. But while I was sitting there, I was thinking about, what's next. And so I started traveling. A friend of mine invited me to speak at a conference in China in 2006. And that's where I went to China for the first time. And it totally hooked me, I have no idea why. It's probably the remoteness of it, the difference to what we are used to in the West and different thinking. It was quite intriguing. And it's a big country, it's a lot of people, but they're making a good plan, and that was interesting to see. And so I've came back ever since and started a project that builds technology for the Chinese music markets. And while I was doing that, the idea of 88 came together.
And what is the number one problem facing international music trying to find a distribution channel in China?
It's the approval process. Chinese internet and media market is fully controlled by the government. That sounds harsh, right?
Yeah.
But it's actually not, because, what they do is they kind of establish basic ground rules, right? Things that they don't want to see in public media for the people not to be distracted by it, right? After all, the Chinese government has the task of making 1.5 billion people happy every day, and because they're in such a developing stage, that only means giving them food, providing them with an apartment to live, and then take it from there. That the consumerism in the music industry is in such an advanced state over there is incredible, because China only came out of the dark ages 30, 40 years ago. That's not a long time.
No.
And So they control this development by controlling certain stuff that gets on the market. But, they've become quite liberal with that, and that's actually a good thing. China's in a good state, as everybody might know. The economy is good, so the market opens up. We're entering a spring period. And, nevertheless, the rules are established. You have to find a Chinese publisher to release your music, and this Chinese publisher has to put your music through to the approval process with the cultural department. Yeah. And then, they'll make a decision. That can take weeks, usually 6 to 8 weeks, and cost $270. Yeah. And then if you're not approved, you're losing the time and the money.
Yeah. And how did you guys find a way to streamline this process? Because it sounds very complicated. So did you go through just one publisher, or do you have several publishers you work with?
We have one partner, right? Shanghai Synergy Group, SSCEG, who is a subdivision of the Shanghai Media and Entertainment Group, biggest media conglomerate in the country. Naturally, because they're a state-owned firm, they have great relationships with the government, right? And they got, when we started with 88, I was looking for a very simple publishing administration partner to be able to offer the product that we are offering. And when I spoke to them, and I've been knowing them for a long time, basically, they immediately said, yes, we want to do it. We want to be your partner. And that was quite unexpected, as they are such a big company, right? But they kind of explained that, it totally fits our politics. We want to open up the market for more Western music. It's an anti-piracy play as well. Yeah. The more legal music is available, the less people will have to download it illegally. It's a very simple equation, right? And so we came to this agreement, and now we have a great setup that allows us to put content onto the Chinese market in 2 to 3 days. And I think that's pretty spectacular. Yeah. We are fine-tuning the process at the moment, but what we have as the ground foundation now is brilliant.
And after the process of approval, where is the legal music sold in China? So what are the biggest legal sites, and do they have a lot of visitors?
They do. It's the CNA, for instance, and then, of course, there's the whole mobile services industry, right? Yeah. And that's actually the big 700-pound gorilla in the room, because mobile services means that all the content is legal, it cannot be pirated, and there is transparent accounting. Yeah. That only happened like 6 months ago, because before that, telecom operators were not obliged to share the revenue that they make with ringtones and ringback tones with the content owners, believe it or not. But this has changed now. There is legislation in place, and they actually do that. So of the $3 billion, US dollars, of annual sales in that market, they are now paying out 26%. And this goes into, to the content owners and publishers. I think it's a great step into the right direction. The number, what they pay out, will rise. I'm pretty certain there are already attempts by content owner, lobby societies to get that number up to 50-60%, and this will happen too.
And getting the music into the market is one really important, essential step. But once that is completed, how do the artists actually raise their profile in China so that people will actually want to listen and buy their music?
See, the wonderful thing about China is that it's a big, wide open space. Yeah. And the genre thinking, the individualism that usually comes from, being interested in the music industry is not very, very well developed, which, is a blessing and a curse at the same time. The blessing is that the people are very, very much hungry for music, and they listen to everything, right? Yeah. And they make their own decision. So you won't find a lot of prejudices, and the chances for people who are not big in the West to succeed in China are very good if you make the right steps. Right steps are playing in China, getting on, there are 20 cities 35 cities now that have more than 20 million inhabitants, so this is the tour. Organizing that is not easy, though. You have to find the right people, but, a lot of companies are doing good work in China by breaking that market, right? Yeah. Getting on radio, singing a song in Chinese, those are the things that the Chinese audience appreciates a lot, right? And then, the market is yours. But, starting with making your music available legally is actually the key. This is what needs to happen. And then, you can begin and ignite the discussion about your band.
And, China kind of has waves where, last year there were problems with Google and, people weren't quite sure. And a few months ago, people weren't quite sure whether Google was going to stay in the country. Now it seems like that controversy has been resolved, and Google has actually sustained his support for the music site top100.cn, which is one of the big music sites in China. So how do you see these developments as affecting a company like yours? Do you think that it's the fact that Google is going to stay in China is a positive sign for you guys?
No. I tell you quite frankly that I don't believe in the ad-based music model, as it's not good for the content creators.
Yeah.
It limits the market and its revenues very much so, and is not sufficient and sustainable at the moment because it's not big enough, right?
Yeah.
So at the moment, whoever benefits from that is Google, and because of the traffic and fees that the advertisers have to pay them for putting up the advertisements.
Yeah.
I dismantled that kind of play by Google when they started in April last year at the conference in Shanghai. And it still stands true, and I know that Google, didn't leave China amongst the controversy about, freedom and, the right of free speech. It was because they didn't do good business there. Baidu is kind of, controlling the market and has even more so since Google has left.
Yeah.
So, it's hard to break that monopoly, and surely, even Baidu facing harsh criticism from the Chinese government over providing piracy links, they will stop that at one point.
Yeah.
And still be very big. So I don't know how this is going to pan out for Google. I'm not interested in the side of that business. Also, the top100.cn promised, over promises. It's no transparency in the business model.
Yeah.
There is, they promised 4 mobile companies in China and over 100 websites. Well, they should name them, they should show the sales platforms, they should show, what is actually getting sold, and what's the share that comes back. I have yet to meet the first person who does business with top100.cn and, claims great revenues.
Yeah. And one thing that is really interesting about your company is that it's not like, it's a fairly straightforward service that you provide, but it has many different partners because it's actually quite a complex process. So you have partners both in the US and Europe and on the Chinese front side as well. So let's start with Europe and the US. In May, you partnered with a New York-based company, Music with Subtitles. So what do they do, and how does their company integrate with the service you offer?
Interesting question, actually. Entering China and making a system work, or an offer work that's, what we're doing, and that's a big art. It's not easy, people underestimate that always, they look at the successes and at the things, but, a system needs to work to be successful, and that's actually the tough one. And in a process, like we offer it, from step one, meaning an artist finding us, down to the last step, whereby everybody is happy because we send money back as revenue. There's a lot of, stages involved, a lot of people involved. It needs to be translated, it needs to be prepared for the right metadata. It needs to be database, people need to pick it up from the database, put it onto the sales platforms, into the mobile services platforms. There's billing, there's accounting, so it's quite a complex thing. Harder than people imagine. And that requires, great partnerships. And Music with Subtitles, totally plays to our translation business.
Yeah.
Because 88, of course, is also a translation company. That's the bones of what we offer. Because China doesn't accept automated translations for the approval process. They all need to be manually translated.
Yeah.
And this is what we do, and that's where Music with Subtitles comes in. We want to expand the translation services. We are in talks with a couple of big companies worldwide, that, will use our system, our workflow system, for their benefit and ours.
And on the supply side, still talking about the US and Europe, you've partnered with Groove Shark artists and also with HelloMusic.com. What I was wondering is artists that are kind of small to medium sized, so that don't have a huge audience in Europe or in the US, are they interested in Chinese distribution, and are they prepared to invest into making their music available?
Yes, of course. That's what we always say. Is like when you are a band, that is a decision that you have to make, right? Much as the same decision as that you establish a website, you put your stuff up on iTunes through any digital aggregator, and you pay them, right? And the other decision that you make is, do you want to be available on the biggest music market or no?
Yeah.
And because the fees with us are so reasonable, we suggest you just do without knowing what the outcome will be.
Yeah.
But it might just happen that you have a great outcome, right? And you build an audience and you be successful. It would be stupid not to do it. You can do it alone, you can try, but that's, not worth your while, because it will just eat up all your resources. So we are basically the best offer to do that.
Yeah. And on the Chinese front, it's interesting that you mentioned before that, the government has to provide for the population, in the sense that, the whole entertainment and sort of commercialism has only come into the game in the last 20 to 30 years, really. And you've partnered with people like the University of Science and Technology in Beijing and the China Foreign Affairs University. So how receptive are those institutions to the idea of music and culture as a commodity that can generate a significant amount of business within the country?
They start to understand that now, and that's good. Like conferences and workshops like the ICIS in Shanghai help to do that, right? China knows that their period of being the workbench for the world is kind of over, and that they have to base their gross domestic product on a healthy mix of things. And one of those healthy mixes is respecting intellectual property and making money with it. That's not only music, that's copyrights in general, that's trademarks, that's, IP rights, software, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And once, this is all part of the developing processes, that you begin to start appreciating intangible goods as well as part of your money-making system. And, they begin to do that. It wasn't important, up until now it was not important, but that's changing.
In China, the idea of piracy is hard to grasp by the public as well, I think, because even the majority of CDs that are sold are unlicensed copies. So how do you create the culture within the public? How do you convince them that content is worth paying for? And do you think you need government support to do so?
Both, right? It's a two-way play. The government is doing their part by having introduced a very simple systems whereby content is numbered now, which means when they find websites that carry unnumbered content, they will be closed down. So that's their very simple anti-piracy measurements. That works in China because, as you know, the internet is controlled.
Yeah.
They have closed hundreds of sites since the beginning of the year, and that's going to continue. And eventually, these sites will only carry legal content. That doesn't mean that this legal content makes money, right? It just means it has been approved by the government. Yeah. Now, the rest of the equation comes from the people themselves, and this is the same problem or challenge that the West faces, is how do you make people pay for music?
Yeah.
Or for content in general, and there's no difference in China. It's convenience of purchase, for instance. I mean, Apple has exercised that, beautifully, and these things begin as well. People buying the mobile download packages because it's just a one-click away and comes off the mobile phone bill at the end of the month where you don't feel it.
Yeah.
These things are happening, and eventually, this will be the biggest market in the world because it has the most people, right? It's a arithmetical logic.
Yeah.
And people already are paying a lot of money for concert tickets and paying a lot of money for cinema tickets. So this will filter down to the music industry as well. I think it's a great time. I think with 800 million mobile phones in the country, with people under 30, I think we'll be well set up for a great future.
And to conclude, what is your roadmap? If there's anything you can share with us for the next 6 to 12 months, what is that you want to really improve and develop in your service?
We want to we want to make it as good as an experience as we possibly can for the artist. Because, it's like what I think, when I think about artists, is that it was always my priority, right, with artists first and is now as well. The variety of stuff that is on offer, needs to be preserved somehow, and that's only be preserved if people, make money. And this is another tool that we have established to be able or enable them to make money. And we want to make the process, as good for everybody, so that there's no argument against it, right? It's like people coming on, they love it, it's not clunky, it works beautifully well, you can see where you'll be sold. The other point of the other side of the coin is that we want to bring transparency into this Chinese market, right?
Yeah.
Everybody thinks like China is so big, it's vast, and it is, but there's so what do you actually are able to earn? What is the sales price and retail price for this and this and that? And we want to bring transparency to that so that if people make the decision to go with us, they can actually realistically look at what they could earn if they use our service. And on a more high-level thing, we have just signed a publishing agreement with the SSCG, so we'll be able to collect money on behalf of writers as well. I think that's important because that doesn't exist in China so far, and collecting is actually very bad, so we're trying to improve that too.
Well, fantastic. It was absolutely great having you on the show, and I look forward to following the development of the company in the next year.
Thank you, Andreas.